projects when the implementation is in progress. We'll take a look at what standards are normally used in the industry and what you expect from your vendor when it comes to project management and the structure you need to be successful for software implementation projects or any type of project management. If you follow the principles and best practices that are outlined for software implementation projects or any projects, they should be delivered on time, within budget, and achieve the success the organization is dependent on. So hopefully your staff and you or your vendor or business partner can have what I've got out here on slide 1, this picture of celebration, recognition, when your projects are complete and successful. So without further ado, well, let's go ahead and move on, and we'll go on to the next slide and work. And let me do a little introduction about myself. My name is Steve Williamson. I'm the Vice President of the Project Management Office here at PMMC. A little bit of background. I was born in Canton, Ohio, which is the home of the NFL Hall of Fame. I went to school in Missouri to start with and then finished up at the University of North Carolina. And I primarily majored in business management and minor in computer science. I've worked in a number of different companies over my years in business. Started off in the Xerox side of things and was in sales and marketing for them, and then moved into American Express when they ventured into healthcare with combining two companies, Systems Associates and McDonnell Douglas. And I worked in the implementation and technical support area for that company. Then I moved into another merger from American Express to a company called First Data Corporation, and ran implementation, worked in audit and quality assurance with all of the software products that we extended at that point. And then moved over to McKesson, spent a number of years at McKesson in development, support, and then also was in the sales and marketing area for HIS systems. I did do a small venture with Cerner Corporation in sales. I sold clinical systems for them, and I've actually done some implementation on the clinical side too. And then Brad had indicated today I'm working at PMMC and manage the project management office. I've been involved in healthcare for approximately 30 years, and that's a little bit about my background, and let's go ahead and move into the topics we want to talk about today. So when we look at project management, I like a simple definition, and this is pretty much to the point. Project management is the process and activity of planning, organizing, motivating, and controlling resources, procedures, and protocols to achieve specific goals and objectives. There's a lot of ways to interpret project management. There's lots of definitions, but this one I like the best. And it really focuses on just the key items that are really important to make these things come off without an issue. So let's take a look at, and I use Dilbert a little bit to emphasize a little bit about project management. So if you look at this cartoon or this comic here, this is an example of project management, and although very simple, you can see what this is all about. And if you look at this, it says, I hired all of you because the project will take 300 man days to complete. Well, there's 300 of you out there, so I want to finish by 5 o'clock and clean out your desk, and you're all fired. If it takes more than one meeting to manage a project, I lose interest. So although this project is very concise and very precise, this typically does not follow the real aspect of what we want to do in project management. So I share that because you have to also, when you're working on projects, you have to have really good patience. You have to have good flexibility and be able to deal with a lot of items that are thrown at you. So let's move on to a couple of things I want to go into. The first part would be you almost have to look at why projects fail and what those causes are. So let's take a look at those. And I think this is very important. And this was put together by Project Management Solutions. And they look at this each year. And I want to spend a little bit of time on this. So when you look at the top 5 causes of troubled or failed projects out here, they involve requirements, resources, schedules, planning, and risk. And each of these really can complement the other. So it could be twofold or even morefold when you look at what causes failed projects out here. So how many times do you look at a project and really the requirements haven't been identified? They're unclear, they lack agreements, they lack priority, they're ambiguous and really imprecise. I think a lot of times if you don't go through the requirements and you don't know what's expected of you, then again your project is probably not going to follow that succession route. When we look at resources, this is a big plus or minus for software implementation projects unless in what we see every day. Everybody is probably trying to do more with less resources today, but when you make an investment in a project, or whether it be software implementation or anything else, you have to have resources to make it run and complete on time. So lack of resources, conflicts of resources, turnover of key resources, and poor planning of the resources really can impact the project out there. Then we also look at schedules. How many times do you get handed a project that have too tight, unrealistic, or overly optimistic timelines for those to be completed? That is a big issue when it comes to any kind of project out there, because in most cases you're asking someone to do something that just is not going to make sense, and the attitude, the overall optimism, and all of the parts that go with that project then really aren't on a positive time frame or positive front. And then planning. I would say this is one of our most important things that we do at PMMC would be for planning. A lot of projects today don't do the kind of planning that is required to make the project successful. They don't have all the data. They're either missing items, or some of the details, or some of the estimates are not accurate. And those are really critical to being successful with the projects that you're working on. So as you can see from each of these, and let me not forget about risk. Again, risk, each project has risk. Some of it's identifiable, some is unidentified, some is assumed, and some is not managed. But a lot of times people go into projects and they lay that project out, they follow the project, but they never look at all of the potentials out there where risk can insert itself throughout the project. And if you don't do that, then there's usually a surprise, which usually will lead to not necessarily a failed project, but it will potentially move one out of scope or maybe a delay. So I think you can see that when you look at all 5 of these, they can contribute or be a combination to really a failed project out there. So how do you turn these around? And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. But one of the things I want to do before we go into those items is to talk a little bit about the statistics and lessons learned when we're dealing with these 5 areas. So when we look at statistics from project management out here and lessons learned, and these are kind of a rude awakening for a lot of people when they look at these. When you look at each of these items out here, and you see that only 2.5% of the companies successfully complete 100% of their projects, that's pretty staggering. It's hard to believe that. If they follow good principles within project management, they have realistic time frames and resources associated with it, there's no reason a project can't move forward and be successful. If you look at the next bullet out here, average cost overrun on all projects is about 27%. It kind of goes back to the old saying, you can either pay me now or pay me later. So if you plan up front correctly and you look at all of the possibilities out there and keep that project on budget and on schedule, then you'll avoid that particular arena. The next one out here, 57% of all projects fail due to breakdown in communications. Clear and precise communications, a lot of times there's a lot of assumptions when projects are done, and if that communication is not in place, obviously that is a big impact to the overall success of a project. And then 39% of projects fail due to lack of planning, resources, and activities. And I talked a little bit about that on the previous slide, but really planning is really critical out here in order to get that project off on the first step and moving in the right direction. Having the right resources, and then also having the right activities queued up for people and any dependencies in place so that they do it right the first time. And then I guess one of the other things that really is interesting out here is when you look at 60% of failed projects are ones that had a duration of less than 1 year. I would have thought it would have been just the opposite of that, but that's not true. The smaller projects out here are normally more condensed, more items to be done potentially, and again, that is an interesting statistic out here that we see in the project management side of things. And then when we look at the failure of projects with budgets over $1 million is 50% higher than the ones with budgets below $350,000. So when we look at that, shorter projects have a higher failure rate than the ones over 1 year in period. But in some cases, most of those projects probably just didn't get off to the right start. So let's look at our next area we want to talk about, and this comes really from senior management today, and it's a very important thing that we're seeing more and more as we move into our implementations currently, is that 90% of senior executives say that good project management is a key to delivering success results and gaining a competitive edge in business. And it's kind of like this picture here that's on the slide. When you look at a project, there's a number of people, there's a number of pieces out there, and getting those put together and everything fit together on a timeline within budget and everybody working the same way towards a common goal is becoming more and more important within business today. Most projects that we work on have a financial impact to the organization, potentially a resource or competitive edge aspect to being successful. So it really is important out here, and we're seeing more of the senior executives take note of that and be involved in most of the projects that we work on today. Also, it aligns the goals of the organization, it builds teamwork. In some cases, again, you get that competitive edge. So now let's look at some of the methodologies within project management. For those of you who have been involved with project management, whether it be for software implementation projects or anything else, we follow a number of standards out here, and there's a book that's known as the PMBOK book, but it's the Project Management Body of Knowledge. It's in its fifth edition. Probably not the most exciting reading that you can probably do, but it does go over all the particulars necessary to do successful projects and follow an outline that really promotes the achievement of what you're trying to do and the overall objectives within projects. So we embrace the project management and implementation methodology that supports these principles from the Project Management Institute, and then also the Project Management Body of Knowledge Guides and Standards. And when we look at these, there's a number of different aspects within this book that most project managers know inside and out, but the key ones that we look at when we begin projects is developing a project charter, developing a project management plan, directing and managing that project work, monitoring the project, and controlling the work within that project to stay on schedule. And then there's always change within a project. If you don't think there is, then you're probably going to miss a certain portion of your project, because I've not encountered one yet today that has gone so smooth that there never was a change within the project. And then the other thing that's very critical as you finish a project is closing that project out correctly and making sure that all of the different components are in place, so that not only is the client successful, if that's who you're implementing for, but the organization that did complete the work sees that success and continues that relationship on with the customer. So let's look at a couple of more, or at least another general project concept in that as we move forward. One of the things that we see out here within project management is that software implementation projects, they're usually deemed a success if they achieve the objective according to their acceptance criteria within a time scale and a budget. This drawing out here on the left of the slide here with scope in the middle, that's known as the iron triangle of cost, time, and quality. And projects revolve around a scope, and inside that scope will be a large number of tasks. And each of those tasks have an amount of time or duration, also an amount of quality that's required for them to be completed, and also a cost. And these constantly impact that scope. So the characteristics of each of those tasks are very important to the success of the project. And as you go through that, whether it be testing or accepting that, if you follow those principles within the iron triangle, then hopefully you'll end up with a customer that's successful with their product that you've installed, which can lead to testimonials out there. And those items are what really we strive to get to. We want a good business relationship. We want it to be successful, because the only way we're successful is if the client is successful on their implementations. So now let's look at some of the key components of the software implementation project. And again, I mentioned these slide before last, and I'll go through each one of them, not in a lot of detail, but I think it's important to note these. I have seen customers work very hard on a project charter. And a project charter out there defines and outlines the expectations of the project. I've seen very formal documents of those, and I've seen a one-page document that outlines what that project and the expectations are all about. And here's some examples of what we see, at least in the software business out here. You might have these as some of the expectations out there, that software will provide the organization a competitive advantage. It will also allow an organization maybe to move to industry standards. It will allow the organization to invest in technology and lower their cost or return on investment based on them putting in these new features within a 12-month period. So there's all kinds of these type of things that can be put into a project charter. And a little bit later on, I'll show you a couple of, or at least a sample of one, and maybe cover a couple of other points. So now let's move on to the second methodology out here that we identified, and that's the project management plan. There are a number of components within that project management plan out here, and when you look at it, it involves the project managers. It also involves the project plan and scope, the project schedule, resources, and the project communications. For all of our projects, or the ones that we have been very successful on, there's usually two project managers. And those project managers, there's one usually on the vendor side and one on the client side. And those two individuals really are the key to managing the project and making sure that both entities live up to what they're really supposed to do based on the signed contract. So when you look at the diagram over here, you have a project manager in the center. the three areas here, scope and schedule and resources, those are critical to really setting up and delivering your implementation. And they impact all the other areas that are outside of that. So when we look at communications, communications are very critical for a project to stay on tap, for people to know what's supposed to be done at what time and delivered accurately and achieved on time. Also, when you look at the schedule itself, building a schedule really is pretty easy to do. Building a schedule that really is realistic for folks to complete the work and to make sure that it's delivered on time takes a lot of input. You also have to look at the risk involved. You have to look at vacations or PTO time. It could be a number of different things in there. And then when you look at the project plan out there, we use a number of tools to manage the project. And we do use Microsoft Project because if we do have a change out there, then we can determine what that change will do to the overall project by just implementing that one piece into our plan, and it'll make adjustments to our overall timeline. And then we can decide if we want to approve that change or not approve that change. So let's look out onto the next area here, and we'll talk about directing and managing project work. So once you do have that project management plan in place, it's been approved, and everybody signed up, and the team is ready to go, or you've basically gotten close to where your team is, then you have a number of components that really make that project go and are critical to the success moving forward. And when you direct and manage that project work, leadership is really critical. You have to have project management folks or executive sponsors that will really promote your product or your project out there. And if you can do that and the actual staff see that, I think they're motivated, they're a little bit more motivated to move forward and really try and accomplish what the organization is trying to do. When you look at the picture out here, every project has a team, and it's important to have that team all on the same page, all going for one common goal, and they know what that goal is, and they keep that in the forefront as they move through the project. Weekly progress meetings. These are really critical in order to lay out a number of different things. We use a standard document, and we work very closely with the other project manager, and both project managers usually run this meeting. We do two types of meetings when we look at progress meetings. The first one has to do with the overall team, and we have that on a weekly basis. And that team meeting usually starts out with recognition and contribution, and we open that up for anyone that's on the team to identify either individuals or groups of individuals that have gone the extra effort on the project to make different delivery dates or make sure that accomplishments were made on time. So that promotes recognition, it keeps folks positive, and then we normally cover what are the accomplishments that we've done, where are we going next with the next steps, and then what issues do we have, what risks do we have, and how are we going to solve those and still keep the project on schedule. So then we review the actual project plan. We'll look at certain tasks that are completed, who's assigned to them, how long they have to take care of those, and when the end dates or the due dates are. And then, of course, obviously you want to look at budget. It's very important to keep your project on budget and as close to the timeline as you possibly can. And if that is going to change, normally we go to the executive level and make a presentation to make any adjustments so that we do have approvals if that warrants it. And the last thing, as I've mentioned earlier, project change requests. All implementations have them. It's how you handle those change requests that are really important to the success of the project. Some folks look at those as issues, but we really don't. It's just something that has impacted the project. In some cases, it's a requirement. And we find ways to really either roll those into the project, or if it sometimes is necessary, it might be a requirement for the project, but it's worth it to move it out, say 30 days, in order to make sure that we hit all the requirements that the overall project is supposed to complete. So let's move on a little bit now to one area which we call the monitor and control of the project work. And obviously my office isn't like this with all of the NASA gear and everything monitoring every aspect of the business, but it is important to monitor your project, especially key milestone dates. Normally if you hit your milestones, then you're on schedule to really have a successful project. We also control the project deliverables, so we want to make sure that if we're looking for a deliverable, people have the right amount of time and the right resources in order to deliver those on time. We look at resources. You have to be on tap for making sure that your resources are available when you need them to complete the projects. This includes looking at PTO. This looks at if you were to lose a resource for another project, you have to have some contingency plans in place for resources, because there always are unexpected items that come up when it comes to resources. We also look at the schedule. How do we control that to make sure that the key items are getting done without any issue, and that we really don't have any bumps in the road out here? And then normally on a weekly or monthly basis, we monitor the risk. We look at things that can impact our project to make sure that we don't have something that comes up that was unexpected and would potentially put that project at risk. So now let's go over and we'll look at one area I've talked a little bit about. Again, that's change control. How we handle change control, or what it's known as perform integrated change control, is when we have something that's going to impact our project that we haven't thought about, or it's something new, then we log a change request. It's a formal document. We fill it out, and we have the two project managers usually are the start of this. They'll take that change request, they'll define it, they'll evaluate what the change is, they'll look at what options are available to either make that change or exclude that change, and what the cost impact and the schedule impact are. Those are all really important as you're looking at the project, whether it be a software implementation project or any type project. Once that's done, we normally make a presentation of the detail to the executive team, and it's normally decided at that point if it will be included or excluded in the project and what type of approval. Normally we have that document signed off, and it's very detailed, so all expectations, deliverables, and the timeline is really known at that point based on what we're going to make the change for. So when we look at that, that's a really important process out here within overall project, and those are items that we take very seriously as we go through our work. Now the last item out here, as far as the modules, is the close project. And when I look at it, there's a number of keys that make closing a project very successful out here. I know from our aspect we do a little bit more above and beyond when it comes to closing out a project. We normally have an internal meeting to really gather all the aspects of the project and what's been done. We create a document that's a turnover document that we look at all facets of our implementation project and make sure that we've got an issues list for each of those areas, and there is someone assigned to them, and there's dates for those to be completed. So we do a final project, the actual Microsoft project plan, we do a check off of that. We also look at the milestones, and in some aspects when you're dealing with software, you have to go through a number of tests for acceptance to make sure that the software is performing as it is supposed to with the client. So we go through a number of acceptance testing and that to make sure that all of those are in good order. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we create internally a document, and we try to resolve all of the issues that we can before we actually sit down with the client and then talk about the final project review. So we normally will go with an open list of items. My counterpart for the project manager for the client will also have an open list of items. We usually compare those notes, make sure that we have one final list, and they're usually assigned to individuals with due dates so that those all can be completed out. There's a timeline, too, that we normally try to get in place when we build the project plan as a target date for that to be done, and we try to stay as close to that as possible so that we can get everything reviewed, the timelines approved, and we normally go to a sign-off of the project with both parties. And then I mentioned this as part of some of our weekly communications or monthly communications. We do executive presentations to keep the sponsors and the executive team a pretty good roadmap or a picture of where we're at on a monthly basis with our projects. And we make a presentation, we cover it with a stoplight methodology, which shows the items that are green are good, ones that are in yellow are caution, and anything in red would be more of a risk. It makes it very intuitive, you can cover things very quickly, and it's worked very well. So once we do get to closure of the project, we do a last presentation, and normally we close that out. And one thing that is very critical when you look at the implementation side of things too is the turnover of that to your, whether you call it maintenance or your operations area. We have one individual on our projects that is usually a client support or a account manager individual, and although they don't do the implementation, they're involved with every one of the meetings from start to finish, so that when we do hand off our project, they are not starting over from new to learn our client. They have all the integral workings and know all of the individuals that have been part of that process, and that seems to allow us a pretty seamless transition. So I think that's very important to the close project side of things. So let's move on now to some best practices, and I'll go through these pretty quickly. These are some of the things that we do from time to time, or at least within most of our projects, in order to ensure success out here. So in our project management office, a lot of folks with various vendors normally get delivered a contract, and then that project normally starts. Well, we're part of the sales process at PMMC, so I think it's a big advantage that we're allowed to sit in on the negotiations. We go through all of the particulars the client's looking for. We know when that contract is signed exactly what's expected for this implementation project, and that's helped us immensely over the last several years that we've been doing that. A statement of work, we use that as a standard document. It basically lays out the requirements that we're going to provide, and it lays out the requirements that the client is going to achieve throughout that implementation. And as I mentioned, pre-work. We go through a lot of pre-work out here so that when that contract is executed, really within the next 2 to 5 days, we're off and running and beginning our project so that we can stay on our required timeline that we normally implement our projects in. I think executive sponsors, if you don't have them, you're probably at risk as far as your project. You need someone that's going to keep your priority high and also promote your project as you're going through that process so that the staff keeps motivated and you're able to move forward through that successfully. Project managers, it's required for both sides, whether you're client or whether you're vendor. It's an insurance policy on both sides to keep everybody honest and really get through the items you need to have a successful implementation. And then Microsoft Project, we use that for all our software implementations. We do a draft, and it's usually mutually agreed upon once we finalize that with the client, and it's worked very well for us. We like to manage that, but we've had clients manage it, but in most cases we're asked to do that, and it fits right into what we normally would like to do. And then before we do anything on our implementation, when it comes to going out on site and that, we do a software demonstration of what has been purchased. It's very important that the clients see that. It refreshes their mind, and it allows them to start building the questions and the team and the requirements that they're going to need to do in order to complete the software implementation. So let's look at a couple of documents out here now. I talked a little bit about project charter, and I also talked about the statement of work. These are just two examples of what we have.
And Steve, if I could interrupt quickly, what's
Sure.
the main purpose? What's the main purpose of the project charter, and what do you recommend is all included in that?
Well, I've seen, as I mentioned earlier, I think that's a good question out there. I've seen all different flavors of this. I've seen where it's just a 2 or 3 page document of narrative, but I've also seen project charters more detailed, like this one is shown on the screen here, where you say, what's the opportunity, what's the goal, what are the objectives of the project. You'll see who the team members are, the stakeholders, what's in scope out here, here's their risk and assumptions, and then usually there's some sort of timeline or milestones that are put out here so that this is referred back to on a periodic basis so that everybody understands really where they're going and has embraced that overall project. So that's a great question, and I see folks now are more inclined to do this project charter, and it becomes really part of their policies and that for when they really implemented the software. And I talked a little bit about the statement of work out here. Again, this is more a contractual document, but I think it clearly outlines for both parties really what's expected, what the responsibilities are, what you're going to actually do. And it's usually somewhere between a 5 and 10 page document, and it clearly outlines all those items. And it's worked very well for most of the projects that I've been involved with. So let's go on to a couple other documents out here. I talked a little bit about the project plan, and I think everyone has a pretty good idea of that. And then we use also a client kickoff meeting agenda. And these are just examples. I would say also one last thing on the project plan. If you've used Microsoft Project, you can go to the nth degree on detail, or you can manage the project at various different levels. I think what we do, and it's very important out there, and it helps our clients on the implementation side, is we track primarily these items. We go with the task, and what's the duration of the project, the whole project, and then down by the task. There's also out here predecessors, and those predecessors really outline the order that things should be done, and that helps again with the overall implementation process. You can also see what's been completed, and then normally we have a start and end date, and that's a baseline, and then we see an actual start and finish. And one item that's not on here that we do also implement is we have a resource field, and we can go down to the individual in the resource, but most of the time we just identify it if it's a client or it's a vendor responsibility, so everybody knows what those are. So let's go ahead and move on, and let's take a look at the last things that we have here on the best practices that we feel are important. It's very important to identify the project team members on both sides for this project. You got to pick the right people. It's very important to do. The kickoff meeting is critical. Normally we go through all the aspects of the project, the timelines, the milestones, and then we break off into individual work sessions. And it's usually a 1 or 2 day session so that when we finish that, everybody understands all the different things that need to be done within that project and who's responsible for those. And then we use an implementation methodology that follows these 4 key components. Planning, and I mentioned how important planning is, but it's kind of pay me now or pay me later. If you do great planning and you look at all the things that are involved in that project and you basically answer all those particular questions and things, then I think your project's going to probably be very successful. Once we get out of the planning mode, then we get into design, and design is very important when it comes to really having the right people that know the current system that they're on and what the future aspects that they're looking for in the new system. And we go through that, build that design, and then once that's done, you really have created a super user out there of the system. And then we go through and we qualify what's been built by testing. And once that testing has been validated, we train the staff. And if you've done those first 3 components very well, then your deployment and production should be really a flip of the light switch, and you should not really see a hiccup or anything. It should be just like it was in a test environment. Your issues should be minimal, and you should be able to move forward very quickly. I talked about our standard communication process that we use for the project. I've talked about the session I have normally is we have a weekly communication for the team, and then project manager to project manager sessions really are important to have on a weekly basis to keep all of the items moving forward and looking at future items and any issues at a higher level before they really go to the team. Executive briefing sessions, we do those with the executive management so that there are no surprises, and if we have issues, we can go to either side to get those resolved very quickly. And we've developed really good relationships at the executive level so that our project is really supported, and if there are issues, we get that attention we need to make sure that if we do need to make a change, it's for the right reasons and we move it forward quickly. The last thing that we do out here, and I'm not sure if all companies do this, but we do a survey within our implementation after it's finished with the key people that worked on it. And we really look at 2 or 3 different things. Number one, we want to know how we did on the overall project from a work aspect. And then we look at our people and how they perform. So we look at those particular pieces, and then we ask a number of questions that revolve around if you would do another implementation with us, and also if you would recommend us to appear for a project. So I think those are very important. This last year we scored 4.5 out of 5, which we're very proud of, and hopefully we still have a little bit of room to grow, but that's been very positive. A couple other documents out here. I talked a little bit about our weekly project meeting. We use a format out here that documents things so everybody sees it. And then when you look at the client briefing session that we do, we typically have 2 or 3 documents, and that's it. They're very short for the executives, and this one's broken into 4 quadrants out here, and you can see our project timeline and where we're at. You can see overall the status out here, and then normally we outline accomplishments for the last month and where we're heading for the following month. So those are just documents that we use. It's important. That's part of the communication process and makes your overall implementation very successful. I talked a little bit about the change request or our change process, and then I talked also about our survey.
And Steve, quick question on this one. In what scenario would a change request document need to be filled out? When does that really come into play?
There's a number of things that we see when it comes to change. We might find that a client had some features on their system that we were not aware of, and we have to develop them. So we'll outline those. We'll identify what the scope is for those. We'll put those into a release, and normally we'll go through that with the client, exactly what's going to be done, and it's laid out in this form, and it's signed off by the client, and normally signed off by us also. So that's one. It could be also you might be changing a date out here, or maybe you're adding a different data file to come in. So there's a number of things this is done, but this is really protection for both parties, and it allows us to really document and see exactly what's being changed and what the impacts are. So that's a great question. We follow that very closely because of the impacts it potentially could have for the project, but so far those have worked very, very well for us. All right, let's move on to conclusion here. I've got a few more slides and then we'll be finished up. I want to talk about what I call project differentiators. And today, or at least in the past, when you look at, and I've talked a little bit about it today, there's a client and vendor relationship. We try to go one step further, and I don't know if partnership is the word for it, but we need to make that relationship a win-win out here with whichever client we're working with. And that could be at the project manager level or the executive sponsor level. And we understand, and we say it throughout our implementation, we have to make the customer successful in order for us to be successful. So we believe that, and when we look at it, these pictures kind of outline that. We really want to develop a relationship where we don't get into it's us or them, but we really get into solving the business problems and go through an implementation that makes sense and is successful for the client. So that's really important when we look at things that differentiate us. Also, look at the people in the team. Very important, if you look at the green, at the one picture on the left, having the right people in the right place in the right time for a project to succeed is probably 85% of the issue. Today we have less resources and more to do, so it's important that the project management or the management that is working on this project understand that if you have the right people in the right place, doing the right things at the right time, for the right reasons, your project is probably going to move very smoothly and be successful. And getting that puzzle put together with all of these people is not that hard when you're all on the same page. Another project differentiator is dedicated resources. The thing I hear most when we start an implementation is, I'm not sure how I'm going to do this because I already have 8 hours of work to do. I call that the project failure syndrome from my dictionary, but we try to work around that. You can't have everyone dedicated to a project, but you have to focus and make sure the senior management knows in order for a project to be successful, you have to have the key people dedicated and departments knowing that they have to have those people in place at the right time for the project to hit its timeline, achieve the results it's looking at, and complete the objectives. So we try to do that, and if you can do that, it eliminates what I call project scope creep, and that's where you might not have had that dedicated project or person, and it ends up moving a deadline out 2 or 3 weeks because you didn't. So there's nothing wrong with that as long as everybody understands it, but the overall goal is to stay on track and deliver your project on time. And another one is accountability. Again, I use a Dilbert cartoon here to talk a little bit about it. I can't stress how important accountability is. When people see you're accountable as the project manager or as one of the staff or team members, it's extremely important to the project. People jump on the bandwagon for that. And I think when you look at this little cartoon here, it kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about. And I'll go through it real quickly. You've got the two gentlemen sitting there, and they said, the one says, I can't give you a raise because your project is behind schedule. Well, that's because the vendor delivered defective equipment. Well, It's your job to anticipate that sort of problem and head it off. Well, it's not possible to anticipate and head off every improbable event. Well, you could have picked a more reliable vendor. Well, you told me to use this vendor because the sales guy took you to golfing and bought you a hat. Well, you should have seen that coming and burned down all the hat factories a year ago. He would have bribed you another way. Well, that's what lazy people say. So like I said, you can go round and round, but accountability is really important, and that goes back to folks delivering on time and being and embracing the project and making sure that the overall organizational goals are met. One of the last ones for our project differentiators is common goal. I think if the team understands what they're doing and what the deliverables are and the benefits of what they're trying to accomplish, I think it makes that project a whole lot easier to complete. We also try to have a team effort as we go through these projects, and you have to make it fun. If you don't make it fun and it's just a number of tasks to be done, then I don't think you'll have as much success as you could. So I think overall the common goal is really important, that the team understand it and it's embraced by everyone. Realistic timetable to complete the project. I can't tell you how many unrealistic timelines I've been handed down the years that I've done project management, but I would say within a project, if you can create what I call SMART goals, those will ensure that you will hit the bigger goals and keep your project on tap. And those are specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely, and that's what basically the SMART stands for. So if you have these specific goals in your project as different tasks and they are identified, measurable, achievable, and that, then there's really not much worry that your project's going to stay on track and you're going to deliver on time. Communication and reward. There's two areas here that are really important. Obviously, we've talked a lot about the communication, but one that a lot of times is not on the highest priority list is policies and procedures, and they're just as important as the project implementation. You've got to document those. You have to keep those available so that folks know why decisions were made, how the business is supposed to be run, and then the motivation side of things, you have to stay upbeat on your projects. Not everything's going to go right, but you got to keep the team moving forward, and you have to hit the particulars that you're looking for and motivate the folks, the reasons why that needs to happen. So those are just a couple things on that. The other thing too is we talk about reward. It's important to recognize people and their efforts made on a project. It goes a long ways to motivating the team and that. And a lot of times people just say, well, that one's been done, that one's been done. But you need to identify why it was done, who did it, what effort they made, because it really makes a big difference. And then change and issues, we've kind of talked a lot about this. I look at changes or solutions. You got to find the solutions to those changes or any issues that you have. You better have a big toolkit or a big hammer so that you can make sure that you're able to resolve those, because they come up and they're all resolvable. You just have to take the right approach to getting those complete. And the last one out here is success. A lot of times projects are finished and people go back to their normal position and nothing is ever said or done other than we finished that project. There should be something that says that the project was successful, whether it's a meeting, whether it's a lunch, whatever it is, but the organization should recognize the efforts and the people that were involved and how successful it is. It's extremely important. It shows the organization cares about the people and really that it was worthwhile to do the project, and you're going to ascertain really the benefits of that. I have seen clients in the past do special things for folks, and that I don't know that that's the biggest requirement, but I think if you can promote that it was a success, it makes future projects more available for folks that want to be involved. And outside of that, that's pretty much it for today. I don't know if there's any other questions. I'm running a little bit late, but for the most part, I hope I covered everything that we wanted to take care of today.
I think we did, Steve. Thanks so much. You put a lot of ideas and best practices out there. We are coming up on an hour, but I do want to open it up to the audience and give everyone an opportunity to ask questions if they have any for Steve. There's a question tab in your control panel, and you can simply type a quick question in there, and I'd be happy to pass that over to Steve. Well, I do have one for you, Steve. What is the biggest factor in your experience that causes a project to get thrown off track and stall out and not get completed on time?
Wow, that's a great question, Brad. If I had to pick, I mean, there's a lot of things that can impact a project, but I really think today you have to have dedicated resources. You can't have someone in a key role in your project that is only part-time. So for those areas that are really important to making sure the project goes, I think you have to have dedicated resources. I think the other aspect, and I'll say there's two, is that you have to be high on the priority list for the organization for your project. If you aren't, then that most likely is going to stall your project while you wait for certain things to be available for you to complete the project. But those are the two big ones, I think.
Great. We did have a question about receiving a copy of the slides. All of the slides will be sent out to everyone along with a recording of the presentation, so if you want to replay it later on or share it with anybody on your team, you'll have the opportunity to do so. Those will be sent out. All that material will be sent out no later than tomorrow. Next question that just came in for you, Steve. How do you recommend handling a project management situation where maybe the deliverables have been overpromised?
Let's see. On items that have been overpromised, it might be, I guess it could be a schedule, and that if there was a timeline that really wasn't realistic, I think you have to go and sit down. I would sit down with my other counterpart and talk about that and identify the reasons why it would not be achievable and see if there's any options on that. If there isn't, then you really want to start that dialogue and move that towards the executive level to see if you can make a change to that, because you really want a realistic time frame to complete things. And if something's been overpromised, then I'd just soon get that out of the way early up front and make sure that you either have options to take care of it or you make adjustments.
Thanks for that. And one more question we have. If a project is starting to get off track, at what point is it best to get the stakeholders involved, and how do you make that call?
Well, we have to be pretty transparent for that. Our timelines for most software implementations are pretty lean and mean. So when we do have something that's going off track, we look at that on a weekly basis. We discuss it. Everybody knows that, and normally that is passed upline to the executive sponsors, because normally they want to ensure that things are going to be successful. So we usually have a meeting or two, discuss those very quickly, and we don't want to stray away from anything that might impact the project. So I would say very quickly. We don't wait around on that one.
That's great. Address it right away, right?
That's it.
All right. Well, we will take one final call for questions. If I see any more coming in here, I'll be sure to pass them along to you, Steve. In the meantime, if everyone would take the brief survey following the webinar, it's just a quick 3-question survey, just to give us some feedback on today's session. We'd really appreciate it if you take probably about 30 seconds to complete that. And I don't see any more questions coming in, so I think we're going to go ahead and sign off for today. Steve, thanks again so much for all the great content and best practices today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks, everyone.